Oz, Wonderland, Narnia, The 100-Acre Wood, Middle-earth, Terabithia, Neverland, the United Federation of Planets, Hogwarts, Jurassic Park, Bedford Falls, Gotham City, and a galaxy far, far away. These are story worlds that someone invented, someone who was once like you, learning to tell stories, learning to write. The authors of these mythical worlds invented places that have become real in the hearts and minds of readers everywhere. You have the ability to create such a world for readers too. Isn't that incredible? I teach often on the topic of story world building. It's kind of my favorite. I'm mostly going to talk about mythical story worlds, but you could apply many of these same principles in creating a fictional town on Earth like Bedford Falls or Gotham City. The first thing you need to do in story world building is decide what kind of story you're going to tell. What's your genre? An epic fantasy or high fantasy require a different level of story world building compared to a sword and sorcery or heroic fantasy story. A middle grade sci-fi novel requires less story world building compared to an adult sci-fi novel. And that doesn't mean that middle grade sci-fi or fantasy can't be just as complex if the author chooses to do that. Just look at Harry Potter. So what do you have? Long swords or blasters? Or both? Horses or land speeders? And for what age reader? If you're not sure what you're writing, read. Find books that are similar to yours and note where they're shelved in a bookstore or a library. If you're not sure which genre you want your story to be, go with your strengths. Go with what you like. I'm no scientist, and the amount of research I need to do to write a believable sci-fi novel is really tough for me. It's not my favorite, and it doesn't come easily. So that makes it harder for me to tell a good story. So I'd rather write fantasy, because in fantasy, it is because you say so. It took me 10 books to figure that out, though. Sometimes you just have to try different genres to know what you like best, and that's totally okay. Once you know your genre, think about the planet or planets in your story. Consider astronomy and things like tides, orbits, habitable zones, suns, and moons. In the movie Pitch Black, every 22 years, the planet experiences a month-long eclipse when all 3 suns go dark and the little beasties come out. Consider for your world, how long is a season? It's unlikely that the planet rotates and orbits the same as Earth. How long are your days? How long are your years? Consider the geography of your planet. I like to start a new story world by drawing a map. Whether or not you draw a map, think about your landscape. Do you have mountains, canyons, plains, and coastlines? When you think about water, remember that rivers flow downhill into bigger bodies of water, or rivers or lakes, and eventually into the ocean. How might your geography influence your plot? In The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship parted ways when they reached the waterfall on the river Anduin. The water forced the Fellowship to take another path, and it just so happened that they separated into 3 groups in that place. Study a map of Middle-earth. It has lots of interesting terrain, like the Dead Marshes, the Gap of Rohan, Fanghorn Forest, and the Mountains of Moria. Take a look at the different types of biomes, such as desert, aquatic, forest, grasslands, and tundra. Research what types of plants and animals thrive in each climate. That can be really helpful when brainstorming terrain. What are the temperatures like in your world? What's the weather like? Think about your astronomical factors and how they might affect the climate and weather. In George R.R. Martin's A Song of Fire and Ice, the planet experiences 7 years of summer, and then winter comes. Hence the commonly used phrase in the books, winter is coming. What about animal life? Do you have any mythical creatures? Dragons, unicorns, something totally unique that you made up? When I read the book Dune, I was fascinated by the giant sandworms. Dune wasn't the only story to use giant worms, though. The graboids in the movie Tremors weren't quite as big, and you couldn't ride them. Let's face it, riding a sandworm is pretty awesome. What about natural resources? In Dune, the planet Arrakis didn't have much water, but it had a lot of spice, which was an addictive substance that gave the consumer telepathic abilities. In The Empire Strikes Back, the planet Bespin is rich in Tibanna gas, which is refined and used to make blasters and coolants for starships. Resources can affect a story in different ways. In Dune, the desert freemen learn to recycle their body's water, and the overuse of spice turns their eyes blue. In The Empire Strikes Back, Cloud City is rich because of the Tibanna gas, which drew the interest of the Empire to try and extort money. This was why Lando made the deal to give them Han Solo. The trick isn't merely coming up with a bunch of really cool things, but in deciding how these things interact and come into conflict with each other and other aspects of your story world. That's what makes things interesting. Consider disease. Could something in your environment cause illness? A plant, animal, or something in the air? In Artemis Fowl, the Atlantis complex is a psychological disease common in fairies who suffer from guilt. In our real world, myomexotosis is a disease that affects rabbits and causes blindness. This was used in the novel Watership Down, and the movie too. Creepy rabbits. In Stephen King's The Stand, a superflu kills off most of the Earth's population, and in my dystopian novel Captives, the residents of the Safeland all have the thin plague. Think about the layout of your settlements. Originally, cities were formed as meeting places for trading goods with other people. Sometimes cities would form because of a specific location that received a lot of traffic, like a bay or a crossroads. They might also form near natural resources like a coal mine. What kinds of cities does your world have, and why? Consider some interesting cities like the planet Coruscant in Star Wars, where the entire planet is one big city, or the Emerald City of Oz, which is green. Hamunaptra, the city of the dead from the movie The Mummy, is a fictional city in which Imhotep's priests were mummied alive. In Brandon Sanderson's Elantris, a city that was once magnificent and is now in ruin since the Elantrians lost their powers. Do you have any interesting landmarks or buildings in your world? Think about some of Earth's iconic places, like our Seven Wonders of the Ancient World or Stonehenge. What kinds of interesting landmarks or buildings can you give to your world? Maybe something of great architecture or a place with some significant meaning. In my Blood of Kings books, the memorial tree is talked about a great deal. This is the tree underneath which the king and queen were murdered years ago. It's the place where the curse of darkness began. The tree is half living and half dead. How about the lamppost from the Narnia books? The Doctor's TARDIS? The Hogwarts Castle from the Harry Potter books? The Yellow Brick Road from The Wizard of Oz? The Daily Planet building from Superman with that giant globe on the top? And the USS Enterprise, a city of sorts that travels through space. Or what about the Gates of Argonath, or Pillars of Kings, from The Lord of the Rings, which are the two gigantic statues of Isildur and Anarion that stand on either side of the river Anduin. Pretty sweet, huh? So, take some time to consider your story world thus far. Have you covered all these areas? Have you done lots of one thing but neglected another? What are you missing? What's one really cool thing that you have so far? Email me and let me know. And be watching for my next Storyworld video called Suspension of Disbelief. Until next time, keep on writing.